Hello, you malty magical malt muggles. It's a malt mention, and thank you to Martin Lucas van Erp 9631 for the malt mention. I'm Ralphie in the Bothy, where whiskey reviews happen, and this is an extras. This is 1034 extras, extra content, extra perspective, extra sharing of my experience, extra advice, extra stuff. And there you have it. So I've just reviewed this whiskey. It's a relatively obscure whiskey, and probably that's for the best, because it's a challenging sherry monster. It's an ill-natured sherry monster. It's not actually a bad whiskey, but what has happened is the casks have absolutely dominated the malt, and the signature of the malt is now completely lost. So does it matter which Highland single malt it is? No, not really. If you can't detect it, if it's not proactive within the bottling, why even consider it? This is a whiskey which is completely and totally cask dominated, and not for the better. Some casks can be amazing, other casks can be dreadful, but you've got a whole load of casks in the middle, malt mates, which are having their different dynamics going on, and they're neither good nor bad. They're just there. They're just exerting their presence. And in this bottling from Adelphi, 12-year-old Breath of the Highlands, my goodness, the cask has completely taken over and is calling all the shots, and we are hearing nothing from the malt. And this naturally, it negates the signature of the malt completely. If you have any whiskey you've bought claiming to be such and such a malt, and the cask has completely dominated, and the whole experience is totally imbalanced between cask and malt, whatever malt it is no longer relevant, because you're no longer registering its presence. So what do we do in this situation where, I mean, this cost me £80 because I buy what I'm reviewing, because it helps me keep control significantly over my narrative as a whiskey reviewer. And frankly, I think it makes me far more useful to you, because I can just give an honest opinion, because I'm not beholden by unwritten contracts from primed samples that whiskey sellers have sent me to leverage my proxy default marketing status for them. For online content creators, I think it's now the realization is that, and this is a bit of a distraction, but it's on my mind, so I'm going to share it with you, that your distilleries and your whiskey businesses generally are very ungrateful to onliners who they happen to send either miniature samples or whole bottles or offer hospitality to. And the fact is that they very rarely actually offer money, and yet the same companies will spend £6,000 to get a coloured full-page ad in a magazine which isn't selling and nobody's reading. So the distilleries generally, the distillery industry generally, are enormously immature in their connectivity to the internet. And then you see this when they're providing their own content, because unfortunately it tends to be very constrained, quiet, wooden and undynamic, and it's just the way it is. Sitting at a table discussing your brand is often as boring as watching a kettle boil or paint dry. People don't want that, and yet distilleries, when they look at their own online option and the whiskey bottlers, they tend to kind of be long-winded, over-analytical, and deal with too much superfluous information rather than directly giving their audience, the viewers, the invested whiskey fan, the information they really want to hear. And therefore they end up relying on going to online content, to creators independent ones who may or may not have an audience and say, well, how about a bit of hospitality, a wee free helicopter trip, and we'll give you a meal, and we'll give you some expensive old whiskey, and there's a little pat on the head for being a good dog. And this happens. Onliners are learning from this now. They're actually getting more savvy as to their own worth, particularly as we head towards the moment in time where the traditional advertising of whiskey is going to be cancelled and deleted because of the health situation. In fact, and what happened to cigarettes is going to happen to alcohol, and particularly hard spirits. We may even see the occasion where specialist whisky shops actually have to cover up their windows with screens just saying the name of the shop. And then people walk in. It's just like bookmakers. And you already know that in many places around the world, particularly in Europe, in America, you walk in to buy a packet of cigarettes and the cigarettes are behind neutral grey solid doors. You have to ask because there's nothing in show. At the moment, alcohol's still in show, but supermarkets will be the first to completely cover up alcohol, despite the fact that alcohol generates enormous profits for the supermarkets. Anyway, back to my subject. This is a challenge. How do we deal with it? What happens when you buy a bottle of whiskey and you open it and you've got some experience a few years behind you and you know that this is a big beast that needs to be tamed? How do you tame the beast? What you do is decant it. Well, no, before that, pour a glass and have a taste. Get your bearings. Don't rely on the first taste, have a second and a third. Small pours. Then decide what the situation is with the bottling. It's not actually a bad whiskey. It's just a flavour demanding and super flavoured intense whiskey, which your palate might not be ready for, or you've just got something that's utterly cask dominated that needs to be toned down. What do? Leave the cork off. It's the first thing you do. Let the bottle breathe. Particularly in the first pour. First pours are often the most hostile pours because it's a shock to your palate. It's the first taste experience, and therefore it's once you become more familiar with it and get your bearings that you can decide, right, let's just oxidize it, let it breathe, let the oxygen start to break down some of the flavonoids in it to make them more palatable. This often works an absolute treat. There's many instances, many evidences that someone's bought a bottle they didn't like, so they just left the cork off for a day or two, stuck it on, put it on the shelf and came back a few months later and the whiskey had, quote unquote, transformed. That happens a lot. Not occasionally, a lot. Another thing you can do is decant the bottle. So get another glass bottle, spare glass bottle, empty bottle, I'm sure you've got plenty. Pour in the contents through a funnel several times backwards and forwards and really get the air into the spirit. This accelerates oxidization in the short term without affecting the whiskey over the longer term. The next thing you can do is add another drop of whiskey to it to kind of balance it up. Sure, you're probably turning a single malt into a blend, but better a nice drinkable blend that you've made yourself than an angry, unsettled single malt. And bear in mind, it's £80 a bottle. These whiskies are not, they don't bring the price down because they're a challenge. Far from it, the price remains the same. So we've got to watch out what we're buying. Simple as that. The next thing you can do is add a tonic. Now, this is not necessarily another single malt. Particularly if you've got a Sherry Monster, adding a reasonable drop of peated whiskey And you don't add it to the bottle, you add it to the glass first, and you'll leave the glass with a lid on it, and you won't drink it immediately. You let it settle, blend and bond, assimilate together. Then you'll stick your nose in it and see where it's going. Already, what's happening adding Port Charlotte, which I just happen to have handy, to this Breath of Highlands, I'm getting some really dark maraschino cherry notes coming through. And because of the sheer imposition of the cask, this isn't dominating. Even when I continue to add it generously, you'd think, well, you're just going to transform into a little peat monster. No. Such is the assertiveness of the cask that adding something as powerful as Port Charlotte 10-year-old, the Port Charlotte is not dominating. Now, I've more or less doubled the volume. That and that, half and half. And yet, when I put my nose to this, I'm only getting the slightest hint of the Port Charlotte. In a sense, it's actually really to have a good bottle of this just so as you can experiment and get your bearings on how it actually, the dynamics of such a bottle. There's something else you can do. Definitely an improved whiskey, but always bear in mind, it may improve immediately, but it always improves more in the long term. So take that glass, pour it into a bottle. I don't have one handy here, but like a miniature. Put the corks on the bottles here. There's no hurry. They're not going anywhere. They're doing fine. And just leave it for a couple of weeks to marry together, to bond, to blend, to assimilate, to settle down. Then come back to out the miniature bottle, into your glass. How is it? Is it improved? Is it acceptable to my palate? Do I need to do more? Then, if you need to do more, here's another topical tip. See when you've got a really dry, astringent, cheek-sucking sherry cask, you want something with a bit of sweetness in it, but you don't want to add sugar and you don't want to add syrup. See Winter Dram. This is an infusion of whiskey and dried fruit. All the sugars in here have come specifically out of dried fruit and their fructose. Add a drop of that. And bear in mind, many sherry casks have a lot of sugar in them. Don't kid yourself. Now we're really getting somewhere. We're not getting a liqueur, we're getting an intense, super flavoured malt, where the signature has long since gone and will never return. No chance. It's not going to happen. Whichever distillery, Highland distillery this originally was, is utterly irrelevant now, because the presence of it and its identity will never be known. No chance. But now I've added some peated whiskey, I've added some dried fruit soaked blended whiskey. What's the results going to be like now? Oh, bit of a splash there. The richness of the sherry is really coming forward because of the soft sweetness of the added dried fruit infused whiskey, blended whiskey. We've got a real hodgepodge here. It's a real mix-up now. But let it settle. And you can either do it methodically using a miniature bottle as an interface, or you can just take this bottle and say, I've spent my money now, It's not going down the sink. I'll leave it for a year. I'll come back to it after it's oxidised. Then I'll add a bit of this and leave it 6 months, taste it, and if it's still not where I want it to be, after another 6 months, and we're talking 2 years in, I'll add a wee bit of sweeter liquor, sweeter whiskey. And a sweeter whiskey you've done yourself, rather than buying these liqueurs, which are loaded with sucrose, by the way. So you could use Drambuie successfully, because Drambuie is still the best quality liqueur, whiskey liqueur. But most importantly, my final takeaway is this: explore. Expand your awareness by not just neglecting the bottle and forgetting about it or giving it away, and certainly don't pour it down the sink. Don't be stupid. What you're going to do is you're going to play with it. Engage with it. You could find that in the end of a year and a half, 2 years, because hey, there's no rushing. There's no expiry dates in bottles of whiskey. There never has been. There never will be. There's no need. Make it a long-term project. Transform a sow's ear into a silk purse. It can be done. Transform an ugly duckling into a beautiful swan. And what you'll learn on the way is just fascinating. You will learn more about your palate and what makes the experience of smell and taste. And I wish you luck in doing so. Cheers. See you later.